In chapter 4.6, we are going to discuss using Grubb's test for an outlier and also a Q-test for an outlier. So an outlier is when you have a bunch of data points and one number seems to be completely off than the rest of the numbers, and we're trying to figure out if this is a random error that we can just throw out. So we can use a Grubb's test to determine whether or not a questionable datum or outlier should be discarded. So the equation is GCalc, because we are going to have to use a table, is equal to that number that you are thinking about throwing out minus the mean in absolute value divided by your standard deviation. So if your GCalc is greater than GTable, the question point should be discarded and it will be considered an outlier. If GCalc is smaller than GTable, the questionable point needs to be retained and used in your data set. So this is what the GCalc table or the GTable looks like, where they have all of the different confidence levels here. And then the difference, which is really important, is they're going off a number of observations versus degrees of freedom. So that means you're not going to be using degrees of freedom for this table, just the number of observations. Let's practice. We have the mass loss from 12 galvanized nails, so we know N is equal to 12. And they were nice enough, if you look here, they gave us the average and they gave us the standard deviations. So if I'm calculating GCalc, and the questionable data is 7.8. So 7.8 minus the average in absolute value divided by your standard deviation. So GCalc is equal to 2.126. Now let's figure out our GTable value. The number of observations was 12 because we're going off of the total observations including the potential outlier, and it didn't exactly say what confidence level, so we're going to assume it's 95. So 2.285 is going to be our GTable. Let's compare it. Ooh, I can't even spell table today. Let's compare it to our GCalc. So our GTable is greater than our GCalc, which means the question is, should the value 7.8 be discarded or retained? Well, if our GTable is larger, that means that the 7.8 value should be retained, and it is not considered an outlier. So other ways we can potentially remove outliers is if you know that a result is low or high due to a problem, accident, etc., then the probability that the result is wrong is 100%, and the data point should be discarded. That means if you're running an experiment and your arm knocks the instrument and you have a false reading, that would be an easy throw out. You wouldn't even have to do the math or prove that it's an outlier. You would just start over and assume it was. You would have to make a note in your laboratory notebook with an explanation, and any data based on a faulty procedure should be discarded no matter how well it fits the results of the data, the rest of the data.